Welcome to Beyond the Pillion podcast, episode 2. My name is Kahiwa, Sebire, she, her pronouns, and I am the chaotic one.
And I am Mark Drechsler, he, him pronouns, and I was once banished from the kitchen for using the dishwashing rag to clean my chain. True story, folks.
Today we are talking about motivation, risk, reward, and cost when it comes to becoming a motorcyclist and answering that question, do I even want to do this?
But before we start, we will just briefly acknowledge that today we are making this recording on the traditional land of the Kaurna people, and we would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So, why people ride? Kahiwa, you've been riding for nearly 5 years now, I think. What was it?
Around about 5.
What was it? Why did you start in the first place?
Well, I think as we outlined in the previous episode, a big part of it for me was riding on the Pillion with you and really enjoying the thrill of being on a motorcycle, and then deciding, actually, I think this would be better if I was in charge. I think I would have more fun. And that then kind of led into, for me, having a vision of being a motorcyclist, a badass motorcycling chick, was something that became a bit of an aspirational goal, a vision for myself. And that coincided with also starting a job in the city and having to commute. Previously, I would have taken the train, and that's about an hour or so door to door, give or take. And on the motorbike, I was like, oh, this goes down to like 30 odd minutes. Saving some money in terms of parking or public transport. So those were some of the key drivers that I can recall.
So given that you are still recent enough that you can actually remember why you got into motorcycling in the first place, has you had that sort of vision and that perception of what it was going to be like? Has the reality matched it?
I think from the pragmatic perspective of riding a motorcycle, to a large extent, yes, it has matched the expectations. It is certainly cheaper. It is faster to commute, and particularly if you're riding in like peak hour traffic and you get the opportunity to lane filter, that really does save a significant amount of time. I recall going from my L plates onto my R-Date license, which is when in South Australia you are legally allowed to lane filter and ride in between two lanes of traffic travelling in the same direction, and that cut my commute from about 45 minutes to just over 30, so it made a huge difference. Some of the downsides about riding from a pragmatic perspective, all of the gear, carrying around a helmet or big heavy boots or a heavy jacket, because I am one of those motorcyclists that very highly values and prioritizes safety, and didn't quite understand how much that would have an impact on kind of going out and about. But luckily there are some really good brands of clothing and accessories that do also look cool, because that is important. I think I underestimated how enjoyable it would be to ride, and particularly once I got more confident, once I'm able to ride bigger bikes, have better technique, and just ride better, the experience of riding is even better than I imagined. And whilst in my mind I think I probably haven't quite achieved fully actualized that vision of being badass motorcycling chick, I think I kind of am, and just haven't quite realized it. And it is a lot of fun. Riding, just kind of being a part of the bike and working with physics instead of against physics, which is something I think you've said quite a few times. Big difference between riding a motorcycle and, say, driving a car. Yeah,
good, excellent.
And so, Mark, what do you think are some of the main benefits you see from your experience?
Well, I think everything that you've mentioned. Yes, I would put in there about some of the benefits. for me, having ridden for quite a lot longer, well, it's something particularly for people as they get older. Just to throw something a bit different in there, is keeping your balance good, and keeping your level of fitness and mental attentiveness up and positive. Talk to most motorcyclists, and you'll get them talking about the kind of feelings that you can get, but from riding a motorcycle. But I actually found a 2021 research article from the Journal of Brain Research. Do a Google search for that one, and you will find it, which is called the modulation of attention and stress with arousal: the mental and physical effects of riding a motorcycle. Very interesting research paper, because it did talk about, in a controlled study, people who were regularly riding motorcycles were, firstly, they were more mentally attentive. They were just more switched on and more aware of what was going on around them. And secondly, they had increased endorphin levels. So both very, very positive things. And I would throw into that as well, again, as I've nudged the half a century mark with my age, noticing that my balance isn't as good as it used to be, but riding bikes is a very good way of making sure that I am continually training myself to keep that balance there, and being used in a very regular type of way. So I think those are a couple of the other ones. I think, summing it up, it is just a more enjoyable way of getting around. So getting from point A to point B, regardless for me of whether I am out on a bit of a Sunday ride, or if I'm commuting to work, and I probably commute to work maybe 80 to 90% of the time, I would be on some motorbike of some sort. Whenever I'm doing that and I'm jumping onto the bike, whether it's going to work or coming home, it's just something that's enjoyable. And the counter to that is, on the days that I do ride the car, I sort of get in there, and for any of our South Australian listeners, get onto the very long parking lot that is South Road, moving at walking pace, being overtaken by elderly people riding push bikes, riding in the bike lane, and realising, yeah, there is a lot of positives about not being being in a car and being on a motorcycle, if you have the kind of lifestyle that will allow you to be on two wheels. So, Kahiwa, what are some of the other benefits that you've seen, other than the ones that I've talked about? Have we missed anything major in what we're talking about here?
I think, again, from a really pragmatic level, given cost of living crisis and all those types of things, the price to actually run a vehicle is pretty considerable when you're looking at a motorbike, comparing that to most cars, or at least petrol cars. We recently did a ride, 1,800k trip over to rural Victoria and back, and worked out that we probably spent about $50 worth of fuel. Which is pretty good in comparison to cars.
Quick clarification there. I think it was about $50 each way.
Oh, it's $50 each way.
Yeah,
it's still pretty good.
Yeah, it was getting to from Adelaide to Melbourne on about $50 worth of fuel, which is far better than what you will do in most cars.
You can tell I wasn't really paying attention with the dollars.
Yeah, this is when I talk and Kahiwa just kind of tunes out. 3.8 litres per 100 kilometres for the entire trip for those who are nerds about fuel economy. Sorry, go on, Kahiwa.
Because in comparison, I used to have a Volkswagen Golf, and the highway fuel efficiency on that was in the kind of low fours. And I think, it's really worthwhile if you are looking at something that is a fuel conscious option for getting around. Motorbikes are a pretty good option there. Also, in terms of parking, I used to work in the CBD of Adelaide. Getting a parking permit for a car was in the order of $2,000 a year. And for a motorbike, it was, I'm pretty sure, less than $200. And the motorbike parks were a lot closer to campus, whereas a lot of the car park options were at least 1 or 2 blocks away. So that again is helpful. Registration is typically a little bit cheaper, depending on what vehicle you're talking about. So from a pragmatic perspective, there are some significant tangible rewards or benefits from having a motorcycle as a vehicle of choice. Anything you wanted to add, Mark?
Oh no, I was just going to say, I think anybody who has ridden before will hopefully know and agree with most, if not all, of these. That there are a whole bunch of really good things that come along with just being a motorcyclist, with just regularly being on 2 wheels, but with every up.
But before we do that,
sorry.
I did want to. I think another, those are some of the more tangible benefits, but something else that for me is a really significant intangible benefit is the enjoyment. And specifically, I can think of 2 moments in a lot of rides that have actually a really high value for me. So one of those is that rush when you accelerate, when you pull on the throttle, and it can be just instantaneous and it's a really short moment in time, but it is a wonderful rush. And you don't even need to be actually going that fast, depending on what bike you're riding, but it can feel great. And the other one for me, which I found even really early on riding as I started getting more confident in my cornering, was finding that really perfect moment in any particular corner where the bike is just balanced. And there's this one moment in time where everything just feels right. And then particularly if you can then link that onto another corner straight after, and that flicking motion from one corner into the other corner is it's really hard to describe, but it's almost like you're floating, you're flying, and gravity isn't there. I don't know. It's great.
Yeah, it is one that is very hard to describe to anybody that hasn't ridden a motorbike. Trying to explain that to people who are used to driving cars. I mean, you can, if you've got a decent car, you can nail a corner in it, but it is not the same as getting a corner on a motorbike absolutely perfect, realizing as well that you're being held onto the ground, leaning over in one direction or the other, and stuck to the ground by 2 bits of rubber that are smaller than the palm of your hand, it being the only thing that is holding you onto this planet as you lean over in an angle where if you were standing still, you absolutely would not be leaning over to that angle. So no, there's an element in there, and it's different from cycling as well, with the fact that you have acceleration, particularly accelerating through a corner. The balance of being able to have that acceleration and drive out of a corner on a motorbike, where Kahiwa, as you say, you create a perfect moment where you are in perfect equilibrium with all of the different physical forces that are at play in that moment, and it's a very special feeling.
Yeah, it really truly is. But like you said, with every good things there are some bad things, and in this case, I know for us the way that we think about it is about risk. And how do we manage those risks, because they are real. We know that the incidence of collisions and injuries are much higher as a motorcyclist than as a typical car driver. But Mark, you were doing some looking and saying that the main cause of most of those collisions tends to be speed.
Yeah, speed and or drugs / alcohol. Take your pick. But before we start looking at that, I mean, anybody who is thinking of getting into motorcycling and hasn't had a license and a bike before, unless you are like me, surrounded every day by people that just live and breathe motorcycles, then no doubt you will have a concerned friend, a well-meaning friend who will tell you the absolute goriest horror story that happened to a friend of a friend,
or a parent who says, "No, that's
or a
just too
parent.
scary."
Yeah, you will without doubt have people that tell you, no way, that you'd never see me on one of those things. You're going to be a temporary Australian, etc., etc., etc. And that can be really off-putting and scary. For people that are even considering it. So I think what Kahiwa said before, that there is a risk in being on a motorcycle. But as with any risk, they can be managed. So yeah, go on. Next time you are looking at your mainstream media, if you're unfortunate enough to watch mainstream media, there will invariably be the motorcycle crash story, because it's good, because you get to see the long distance shot of the poor unfortunate motorbike and or cyclist that's come to grief. It makes for good TV, part one, because people enjoy watching the tragedy and misfortune of others. But then going and doing some more digging and research into most of those accidents, and you will find that the majority of them are either from riders who were under the influence of some sort of drug or alcohol, or were using excessive speed, or were just, Kahiwa, I think fair to say, just riding like idiots.
And I see a fair few of those videos on social media of
yes,
motorcycle collisions, and there's a definite subcategory of those where the motorcyclist appears to be making decisions that are probably increasing their risk of harm to themselves or harm to others. And the reality is, when you are on a bike, you are more exposed. You don't have all of those 4, 5, 6 walls of metal around you. You don't
steel
have
and
the
airbags and
the
else.
airbags and all of the other safety mechanisms. And so that means that any kind of collision, the impact of that is going to be higher if you are on a motorcycle than if you are in a car or another four-wheeled vehicle. And
absolutely,
I mean, yeah, and so a lot of the footage that I see of motorcycle collisions and accidents and injuries, there's a certain subcategory where it looks like the rider is making, I think, poor decisions. But there's also a whole group in there where the sensors, the people driving cars, just don't see the motorcyclists. And I think that's one of our golden rules, has always been to ride as if every other road user either can't see you, so they're possibly going to hit you, or they're trying to hit you because of anger or frustration or whatever, needing to take it out on someone. And so for us, that the way that we manage that risk is by riding pretty defensively. I think not super conservatively, still can have fun and enjoy it, but you are riding with the assumption that people can't see you. So it's my responsibility to put myself on particular places on the road in order to increase the likelihood that I can be seen, to ride with a margin of error in terms of gaps and gaps that I might take for changing lanes or not, or overtaking or similar. To have really good familiarity with the bike in particular, and where it accelerates, how it brakes. Have done some of the courses and practice around emergency braking and braking safely and all of those types of things. And I suppose just generally not riding like an idiot, saving that for
don't ride like an
the
idiot.
track.
Yeah, that's where, go down to your local racetrack, buy yourself a set of leathers, take your bike out there. We'll talk more about track days later on, but if you want to cut completely loose and reduce that risk margin to very, very low levels, then that is the right place to do it.
If you want to go fast and take corners and really push the limits of yourself and the bike, the track is it's the perfect place to do that. It's so much safer with your full kind of body leathers, and there's no cars or fences or lampposts for
pedestrians,
bus stops, pedestrians
gravel in the middle of a corner.
Slide into. It's the perfect place to absolutely let loose.
But on our public roads, no matter where you are, that there are always increased levels of risk, which is why we ride with margins of error and buffer zones built in as one of the biggest ways of mitigating that risk. I think back Kahiwa after some big storms that we had in the Adelaide Hills. Both of us came around a corner that we'd taken many, many times before, knew roughly what we should be taking it at. I got partway into the corner, into the lead, and realised that as a result of the storm, the normal line that I would be taking had a very large fallen tree branch down on it. And that was a moment where if I had been cranked right over into that corner, I would have had very, very little in the way of options other than either riding straight through it, which probably would have ended up with me going down, or having to straighten the bike up, trying to ride around it possibly. But if I was going too quick for that, then it would have been stand the bike up and just brake as quickly as I could. But because I had left myself some buffer zone, then I was able to not really change my speed too much, just change my line, drift a little bit closer to the middle of the road, get around the fallen branch, and other than possibly a little bit of a stain in the undies, I think got away from it.
Not necessary, thank you.
Sorry. That these are these boundaries that I've been told I'm not allowed to push. But other than an elevated heart rate for maybe 30 seconds while I thought, wow, that was something that I didn't see coming. The buffer zone was there, and the potentially bad situation didn't come about, and that's how I tend to ride everywhere, whether it's in the hills, whether it's on the road with traffic, with pedestrians, with pets, with anything like that. Build those buffer zones in, manage the risk.
That margin of error, it's not only about kind of as you're riding, but also taking into account the conditions of the road and the weather, like you were saying in that instance, the previous storms, the bike, your own mental state. I know you've spoken a lot about not riding when we're angry. For me, it's not riding hungry, because that affects my attention span, and my ability to kind of pay attention and make good decisions is a lot more difficult when I'm hungry. So I'm really conscious about having a good little protein, low glucose sugar snack if I'm going on a slightly longer ride or kind of going out. So it's about being aware of the risks, not downplaying them, not hiding them, not shooing them away, but acknowledging them, and then putting into plan a way to manage those risks, and making that decision for yourself. Are these risks and the steps to manage them worth the benefits?
Absolutely. And the one last thing I'd throw in there is to say around the behaviour of other road users, because I have forgotten how many times I've heard, I was riding along and I didn't do anything and somebody else just didn't see me. Which, it happens, unfortunately. But those buffer zones help you to paper over the mistakes or avoid the mistakes of other drivers, because other drivers will absolutely make mistakes, and there is very little point in being the party that was in the right if you're also the party that ends up in the back of an ambulance. I think that probably
better
says enough
alive than right
about risks. Yeah, totally. That's another very good way of putting it, to say ultimately your job out there, aside from having a lot of fun and making the most of all the benefits, is not getting hurt. It's not necessarily about showing that you are the person who rides the most accurately and correctly relative to every other road user out there.
Yeah, I know recently I was merging onto the expressway, in the middle lane had one lane on the right, lane on the left was coming to an end to merge into the one that I was in. Had a quite a large ute 4-wheel drive vehicle on my right, just slightly behind, kind of in my blind spot, and a ute in the merging in lane on the left hand side, about kind of on par with me, and we're all kind of going at a pretty decent click. And all of a sudden, the 3 lanes are coming into 2, and the ute on the left-hand side has decided that they want to be in the space of the road that I'm on.
Yes.
So, trying to brake and looking to see whether I can shift into the right-hand lane. The ute on my right decides that's an opportune time to start speeding up for the assumed speed increase coming around the corner. Which left me with the only option of really just braking hard. And in that instance, I probably would have been in a reasonable position to hold my line if I wanted to be right. But it was more important to just be alive. So, hard brake, let the ute on my left kind of take in the lane, let the ute on the right just kind of speed up. Had, similar kind of accelerated heart rate, probably a little bit of internal swearing and screaming. And then calmed down before I pulled out and overtook, and then continued on to make sure that not riding angry, not making poor decisions, because it's quite nice coming home.
Yeah, whatever you're doing, ultimately just call your jets. You are on a small and vulnerable vehicle, and goal is to get home.
Yeah. And so we've talked a little bit about some of the benefits, the tangible and intangible benefits. We've talked about some of the risks and at least how we generally approach managing them. But I also talked about the cost advantages of riding a motorcycle, being a motorcyclist. But there's also some costs of getting a bike as well. Did you want to talk about that a little bit, Mark?
Yeah, I think I would. So working in the store, I do every now and again have someone who's brand new to motorcycling, and I get the feeling that they are purely looking at getting on 2 wheels just because fuel is expensive, parking is expensive.
Which is understandable, because it is.
Which is, I mean, totally right, and it's a very valid justification. But coming in and then saying, yep, so I just need a bike, and I'll just spend, what's it going to cost? Like $1,000, a couple of grand, and then that'll be it, and I'm good to go, and everything's happy. So trying to work out, if you are looking at getting into motorcycling on the road, then trying to understand how much you should be, what's your budget, how much should you be thinking about, because there are some things in there that you do need to take into account that mean that it's not, that there's no one answer. The short answer about how much is it going to cost you to get going really is it depends. And secondly, it's all relative. So, there are some motorbikes that cost less than a reasonably priced e-bike. And there are some cars that are considerably cheaper than quite a few of the motorbikes that are out there now. So purely going on cost is not necessarily. I mean, yes, there are definitely benefits on a cost perspective once you're in there, but it's not. It's sometimes not as simple as it might seem.
Yeah, because there's obviously the cost of the bike itself, which can vary considerably depending on whether you're buying secondhand or new, what type of bike, how big, how fast you want to go on it.
Yep.
Yeah, generally speaking, smaller bikes are going to be cheaper, bigger, faster bikes are going to be more expensive. And the smaller, cheaper bikes, which will be probably really good for getting around the city in the suburbs, mostly flat, nowhere over kind of 60 k's an hour. Yeah, they're going to be a couple of grand. But as soon as you want something that can go on the highway, expressway, freeway, you are looking at something in the order of at least 5-6 grand new, in order to have a bike that is comfortable going at those speeds.
And when we're talking costs here, just a reminder for those around the world, we're talking Australian dollars here. And yeah, if I think about the bikes that we have at work, then the cheapest you are going to find for something that can get out on the road as a brand new bike that will do highway speeds, so talking 100 kilometres an hour, it's going to be about 6,000 new, and work your way up into, for a learner approved one, up to sort of 13, 14, 15 grand, depending on how much you want to spend. And even the second-hand market, and we'll talk more about this in the buying your first bike, but at the lower end of the market, so 5 grand seems to be at the moment in early 2023, that seems to be the number that a lot of people pick out of their head when I ask them. They say, yep, I'm looking at getting my first bike, and I say, all right, how much do you have a rough budget that you're looking to spend? And they say, oh yeah, I'm thinking about sort of $5,000. That is a very competitive end of the used bike market. So and like I say, I won't labour this now because we will have a whole episode on buying your first bike. But there is risk and reward in terms of the cost of buying a cheaper bike. Sometimes you can get away with it. Other times you might end up finding a bike that is 2 or 3 grand, but then you find out that you need to spend 2 or 3 grand worth in repairs to get it to a point where it is reliable, safe, and doing what you need it to do. So there is some thought to be done about that overall cost, and
and the other thing that I think is unique to motorcycling, as distinct from driving a car as your primary vehicle, is all of the other gear that you need to ride a motorcycle. You are legally obliged to have a helmet, which you can get, because Australia, you can get good, reasonable helmets that will keep you safe and do what they say on the box for a couple $100, all the way up to 1,000 plus for getting all of the fancy things like weight and visors and tinting and all that stuff. But then you're starting to look at things like gloves and jackets and trousers and shoes. And your jackets and trousers, wanting things that are either leather or that are Kevlar lined, and have padding at impact areas, because these are the things that help you walk away from a collision, rather than having more serious injuries. The differences are often in your protective gear, and they again can all cost upwards of in the kind of couple of $100 to kind of get started. Again, you can find things secondhand. You might be able to inherit some or share some with other people or from friends, and then you can go upwards pretty steadily on your accessories and your protective gear as well.
As far as you want, depending on how much money you want to sink into it. I do want to jump in there and just mention, you talked about second-hand gear. The one thing that I would implore people to steer a long way away from is helmets. So if you only buy one thing that is a new thing, then make it the helmet. And the reason I say that is that helmets are designed so they have a harder outer shell made of one of a number of materials, and then inside that they have a kind of a styrofoam type layer that's designed to impact shock, and then they've got the inner lining, which is just the material bit that sits against your head, and they are designed so that internal lining will compress when it is hit. So that the outer shell is providing like the hard blocker, but it's the styrofoam that is trying to slow down the G-forces of your head going from whatever speed you're doing down to zero, to cushion that blow and make that minimize those G-forces and make the slowing down process as gentle as it can. Now, when it does that, then that lining can be compressed. Even if the outer of the helmet doesn't look like it's ever been hit, you can have a situation where that styrofoam lining has been compressed. The other one that makes me extremely nervous when I see it is people who regularly hang their motorbike helmet sort of pointing upwards on something pointy like their handlebars, where you just look at it and or the mirrors, and you think, yep, the longer you leave it sitting there, the more you are potentially compressing that interior styrofoam liner, and the less effective you are making the helmet.
And
also,
helmets are a one-shot deal.
Yeah, they're a one-shot deal.
And so if you are compressing that lining, you are effectively reducing the protection, the full impact
of your head,
the effectiveness of that helmet in the one time that you want it to actually be as effective as possible. But I think just generally thinking about gear, a rough estimate is probably reasonable to set aside around about $1,000. For a helmet, for some kind of jacket, some gloves, ideally some Kevlar lined jeans, and some reasonable boots or shoes that cover your ankles as well. Thing I think that thinking about managing risk for me, seeing people riding in t-shirts or shorts or jeans and then sneakers, and their ankles are everywhere, and it's like, the one thing you want to be able to do is that if you come off your bike, whether it's your fault or someone else's or whatever, you want something between you and the road. And any bit of skin that is seeing sunshine is skin that is at risk of serious injury or harm. And again, that mindset of just managing the risk, to me, it makes a lot of sense to just wear the layers. You can get jackets that are really good and ventilated for when it's warm. You can get trousers that are light and breathable, but still lined and still providing safety and protection.
Absolutely.
To me, it's a no-brainer.
You'll only need to have it pay off once, and you will probably never go without it again in terms of protective gear. So I reckon put aside $1,000. You might spend less, you might spend a bit more, but you're probably going to be about right then to get yourself set up with a nice set of startup gear. For things like shoes and jeans and jackets, yes, wearing something is better than nothing, in terms of, okay, at least a sturdy pair of jeans is better than wearing shorts, but a pair of Kevlar reinforced motorbike jeans that have also got padding in the knees is going to be better than a standard pair of jeans. So there's, like most of these things, there's no one right answer. It's just kind of working out what's your own level of risk that you're willing to accept and or pay for, because they kind of go hand in hand a lot of the time.
Which I think is one of the unique challenges of women or people who are assigned female at birth getting into motorcycling, that there are fewer options in terms of gear. So therefore you tend not to get that broad spectrum of, more affordable to more expensive. The options are more limited. And so we'll talk a little bit later around, or in later episodes, around gear and places to get them, what to look for. I plan on sharing my reviews of some of my favourite pieces of motorcycling gear. And the places that I go to get them, because I know that can also be a little bit challenging too. But just kind of quickly touching on the last bit around the cost of having a motorcycle as your vehicle is similar to cars. Things like maintenance, things like tyres, they can look a little bit different to cars in terms of the cycle and how quickly things wear through. I think bike maintenance tends to be a little bit cheaper, but you are potentially likely to go through tyres a bit quicker.
Yep, that's a fair point. So a set of car tyres might, you might get 30,000 Ks out of a set of car tyres, again, depending on what they are. On a motorbike tyre, if you can, particularly out of a rear tyre, if you can get 10,000 kilometres out of a rear tyre, most of the time on most bikes, you should feel pretty happy with that. so that they do tend to wear out. The other thing I would throw in there is just the importance of keeping whatever your bike is, keeping it serviced, so that the fact that you might be up for a few $100 a year for a service. Motorbike engines, but particularly the oil, does a whole lot more than what the oil in a car does. There is less of it. It does more jobs because it also lubricates the clutch as well in most bikes. And it is something that if that wears out, then a motorbike engine will generally be a lot more susceptible to longer term damage if you don't keep it. So unlike some cars that can be driven around for years and years and years without being serviced, and they're not going to complain too much, if you own a motorbike, seriously budget in a few $100 a year wherever you're getting it done, or if you're doing it yourself, whatever the case. That should be considered as a hard cost if you want to maintain the value and the reliability of your asset, and it's simple as that. If you can't afford that, it's not like buying a push bike where you can shove it in a shed for however long and drag it out, and other some air in the tyres and a bit of oil on the chain. That's that. Motorbikes they need a bit more care.
Yeah.
So I'll stop ranting about that now.
and I think it's important that you rant, because I'd probably still need to hear that, because I still don't do the maintenance on my own bike. I am very fortunate that moment. Mark.
That's right. That'll be a later podcast. That'll be a vodcast, won't it, of watching you. Yes, stay tuned later in the series for watching
come and
Kahiwa
learn how to maintain my bike with
and
me.
Check tyre pressures.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the costs, the very real costs of becoming a motorcyclist, of having a motorcycle as your vehicle. Talked about the very real risks and ways to kind of manage them. And I guess the overarching kind of point that we want to say here is that there is no right or wrong. We're not saying you must ride or you should ride or anything like that. It is a personal question. It's up to you whether or not those benefits, those rewards are worth what it takes to manage the risk, to sit with that risk, to think about those costs. I think it's probably pretty clear for us. The answer is yes, it is very much worth it. I think it can be easy to look at a pros cons list, or cost benefit analysis, and try and quantify the individual costs and quantify the risks. But I think the benefits are actually really intangible. The value that they bring, the joy, the contribution to mental health from having something on a regular basis that you actually enjoy, something that takes your brain into a different mode, forces you to think differently, to think critically, to switch out completely from work, from home life. I think that's hugely valuable and really makes it really worthwhile and worth doing, worth sitting with the risk.
Totally. And when I think of some of the people that I know that come into work regularly, shout out to Gordon since I saw him this morning, people who are working high pressure jobs, working very hard at their work. Either they're running their own small business. I've had people who work in some pretty working areas where they would see things in their daily work that nobody would really want to see in their life, and they're exposed to them every day. I have so many conversations with people that riding a motorbike is good for their mental health. It's something that while they're on the bike, they switch off. They're not thinking about work. They're not thinking about anything else. All they are is being on the bike, hunting for, as Kahiwa said, hunting for that perfect moment where the laws of physics all just seem to line up like ducks in a row, and everything is just perfect and bliss. So yeah.
I did think of one more benefit that we haven't spoken about, and I'm shocked they didn't.
That it's cheaper than
it is
therapy.
So important to me. No, well, I mean,
sorry, go
on. Depends. Anyway, that's not the point.
Anyway,
what I was going to say is people and networking.
Yes, very good point.
The opportunities to meet people, to make friends, to explore new places. motorcycling is its own subculture. There's subcultures within
Subcultures
the
within
motorcycling
subcultures,
world.
yes.
But it's a really great way to meet people, to make friends. That I think, particularly coming into a place like Adelaide, where
It's a
stereotypically
bit
people
cliquey.
tend to have their group of friends. Something like motorcycling can be a really nice way to meet new people, to share an interest, to have an excuse to do something, go for a ride and then meet people, sit and have a coffee, have a chat, in a really low key, low stress kind of way. And I've already made a bunch of friends and met a whole bunch of really cool people through motorcycling. And I think that is also a really exciting benefit to being a motorcyclist, which is slightly separate from riding a motorcycle.
Yep,
They're
it's
slightly
all
different
part of
categories
bike life.
benefits. Yeah, bike life. Dun, 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 dun,
Bike
dun,
life.
dun, dun.
That's it.
Hang on, can't do that. Might get copyright.
Yep. No, don't do that. Don't do that. All right. Next episode. What are we talking about at the next episode?
Yes, so next episode we will be talking about buying your first bike.
Yes, that's right.
Experiences, our tips and advice from you, Mark, as a now pretty connoisseur, pretty
the mistakes
experienced
I've made.
master.
Please learn from my mistakes.
As a
Won't
buyer
someone
and
learn
as a
from them?
seller, and I'm now a professional buyer and seller, and probably from me as a very, very risk-averse purchaser of vehicles. We want to share some thoughts and tips on that. So stick around for episode 3. We were talking about buying your first bike. But until next time, if you are deciding to ride a motorcycle, then please ride safe and have fun. And we'll see you soon.